Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, from wherever you are in the world joining this session. My name is James Elsmore. I'm the CEO of Island Innovation. It's a pleasure to kick off this session with some very rousing introductory music. We'll be delighted if you can go ahead in the chat and please introduce yourselves. Tell us where you are in the world, where you're joining from, so we know. I can see that we already have a good session. We had around 500 people register for this session, which is fantastic. And I think shows the great interest in this topic. Of course, energy independence for islands, which is a critical topic. And specifically today, we would like to discuss the critical nature of geothermal solutions and the opportunities and the challenges that come for islands when exploring geothermal energy solutions. We have a set of fantastic experts that will look at the economic, the technical, and the political barriers and opportunities when it comes to geothermal's role in the energy transitions. And so with that, I would like us to okay, we'll be introducing each of our five speakers for some introductory chats and introductory presentations. But I would also like you to take a moment to fill out the survey, which has hopefully popped up on your screen. So please take a moment to fill this out. And in the meantime, I can see in the chat we have people joining from San Andres Island, from Malta, from Trinidad, from the Virgin Islands, Bahamas, from Canada, from the Canary Islands, from the Azores in Portugal, from Germany. Oh, wow, people from all over. Vanuatu in the Pacific, from Morocco, more people from the Canary Islands. Great to see this international interest in this topic. And we really focus because obviously geothermal is not something that is relevant for every island, but many islands are really exploring the importance of this topic and how it can be approached. And I can see specifically islands like Dominica and Nevis are present that are critically exploring this topic. So if you just take a moment to fill in the chat, fill in the survey. And while you're doing that, I will ask, we have a brief video to play from one of our colleagues. So why are we hosting this session today? Well, in a few months, Island Innovation is hosting the Island Geothermal Forum in the island of Nevis as part of the Global Sustainable Island Summit series of events. And I would now like to introduce a short video from my colleague Grace Henry to share some more about this event.
Hi, I'm Grace Henry, Director of Projects here at Island Innovation, and I'm thrilled to invite you to the Global Sustainable Island Summit 2025, co-hosted with the Government of St. Kitts and Nevis, happening from May 27th to the 29th with a week-long series of events. This premier gathering is dedicated to advancing sustainable future for island communities, featuring insightful forums, a dynamic solutions expo, unparalleled networking opportunities, and the chance to experience the breathtaking beauty of St. Kitts and Nevis. Don't miss this opportunity to collaborate, innovate, and create solutions for a sustainable future. To purchase your tickets, please visit our website at islandinnovation.co and join us in shaping the future for island communities worldwide. See you there.
Thank you very much, Grace. And you can see some more information in the chat and on the Island Innovation website to learn more about that. Now, I'll quickly share the results of the poll. I can see, as always, about 40% of the organization joining from the Caribbean, but also a large audience from North America and Europe, and people from Africa, the Middle East, Asia, really a global audience. Half of you from the private sector, but representatives from government and NGOs. And of course, many of you from the energy sector, from the government, and from conservation and environment. So an interesting cross-section of people joining this session. Now, I'm delighted that we have joining us the Honorable Mark Brantley, the Premier of Nevis and head of the Nevis Island Administration. which has been a pioneer exploring geothermal solutions. Nevis, as you will know, as a volcanic island, has a great geothermal resource. And so I'd like to introduce a video from the Premier regarding the Nevis experience when it comes to geothermal energy.
Hi, my name is Mark Brantley, and I am the Premier of the island of Nevis. It gives me immense pleasure to be able to speak to you briefly on the issue of geothermal development on the island of Nevis and in the wider Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. The geothermal odyssey on which the island of Nevis has embarked started nearly 20 years ago. We have been trying to do this for a very long time to bring this incredible resource to the fore for the benefit of our people. In November of 2023, our national parliament in Bastille for the very first time passed a resolution signifying the intent of the federal government on St. Kitts, led by Prime Minister Drew, and the Nevis Island administration, which is currently led by me, to embark on a journey together to harness geothermal for the benefit of all of our people. This is important because geothermal has the potential to transform St. Kitts and Nevis, to take us from our current heavy dependence on tourism to an energy-dependent economy. We recognize that there's a need for us to wean ourselves off fossil fuels, do our part to combat climate change, and at the same time ensure that our people here in St. Kitts and Nevis are guaranteed a steady, clean, reliable, and a cheap energy source. Geothermal can and will be the answer for St. Kitts and Nevis. Currently, our capacity, at peak capacity, we're consuming about 50 megawatts of power. Geothermal promises to deliver in excess of 400 megawatts of power. It means, therefore, that St. Kitts and Nevis will be in the enviable position of having more power than we can consume. That opens up avenues for exporting power to neighboring islands. It opens up avenues for downstream uses of that geothermal energy. And it really means that we now create a new economy, new jobs, a new orientation. Now, I feel this is a good occasion, in as much as it has already been said publicly, to indicate that we've finally secured full funding for the drilling phase of this project. We have secured $17 million from the Caribbean Development Bank, and we've now secured an additional $20 million from the Saudi Fund for Development. We extend our gratitude both to the CDB and to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for this partnership, and we certainly look forward to advancing this project for the benefit of all of our people. As we talk about sustainability, brothers and sisters, let us remember that cheaper, cleaner energy satisfies our commitments to the international community and our joint fight against climate change. However, it also means that we can now do desalination to supply our water needs in a more substantial way. With energy security, water security, and food security, St. Kitts and Nevis will have the building blocks for the best sustainable island state in the world. Our ambitions are large. We think we can achieve them. Thank you very much, and I wish this event all the success in the world. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Premier, for that excellent overview of the approach in Nevis, and we certainly look forward to learning more from the experience of St. Kitts and Nevis during the Island Geothermal Forum taking place in May this year. So more information coming soon about that event. Now, I'm delighted to invite the first of our next 4 speakers to give a brief presentation on their approach to this topic. We have Joseph Williams here, who is the coordinator of the Sustainable Energy Unit at the Caribbean Development Bank. So Joseph, if you'd like to come on screen to share the regional approach that the CDB has been taking when it comes to supporting geothermal. Thank you very much for joining us. I know you have a busy schedule and you're traveling today, but I think it's very important to see, because we know that investment is one of the critical elements when it comes to getting into geothermal. So Joseph, over to you.
Thank you, James. Just checking if you can hear me clearly.
We can. Please go ahead, and we can see your slides
Okay.
as well.
Thank you so much. So I have a few slides. I'm going to skip through a few because I just want to focus maybe on two of them or three, but just to provide some context. And thank you so much. Yes, and we have been quite involved with geothermal since the last more than 10 years, just about 10 years. And so we're happy to share. So could you move the slide for me? Could you, next slide? All right, this one we know very well. The context is about high cost of energy. And why we are in this space is really about affordability. It's about energy security, even above the climate issue for us, because of the nature of energy to the economies. I'm really speaking to the slide before this one, though. But that context is very, very important because affordability is important and energy security in addition to the climate issue. All we do for climate will help those objectives. Okay, next slide, please. Now, when we talk about geothermal, I think this profile is very, very important because it gives you a sense of what we're talking about. Unlike other renewable energy options, the first stage is the exploratory stage is very, very high risk. And as you de-risk, then the cost, there's an inverse relation. So as the risk become lower, the investment cost per unit will become less. In other words, what you need particular instruments to deal with those high risk stage. And what this profile shows is that in the early stages, the risk is extremely high. Once you drill and will have an idea of what the resources are, then that risk drops significantly. It doesn't go away fully, but it moves to a level that's probably now more comparable with other renewable energy options. So that's the unique feature of geothermal in that initial unknown risk, that even after you completed the previous study, the exploratory surface study, until you drill, you really don't know exactly where you are. So that's a very important context because it helps us to understand a few other things. Could you advance, please? So I mentioned some of the costs. It's very important to note that in focusing this area, CDB was keen and very specific as to how we would address the different issues. So cost is one thing, obviously, affordability, and we can speak all about that. The issues that governments have limited debt capacity, very limited fiscal space, and generally for a technology that is new to the region, although it's mature, governments really can't take a lot of the risk outside of the resource risk that's involved with a big infrastructure project like this. We're talking about small, isolated market, limited capacity, that is expertise to support both government as well as a different element in the market. Policy framework, even though they may have some specifically around geothermal, would be weak, inadequate. And then the question is, having said all of that, recognition that a public-private partnership approach is necessary, that also requires definite specific policies and so on. So on the geothermal side, we're talking about a resource that requires high technical support. It's a new kind of risk, requires specific kind of capacity and funding instruments. So we need to get firms that are skilled, experienced, and have financial capacity to do it. And that's a big challenge with a number of the delays because they have had firms in the region who have some sense but don't have the capacity financially, or who don't have the experience and so on. There are lots of unsolicited bids, and those have delayed the process. And so we have to design an approach that helps to overcome those. The environmental and social health and safety is critical because for all the reasons we're talking about, volcanic areas, population of all kind of perceptions, and we have to be able to address those. We're talking about the government being able to negotiate with a very seasoned, sometimes experienced private firm that don't have the capacity. And so we needed to have targeted instrument to help those. Next slide, please. Those situations. And so the GeoSmart initiative essentially focus on how we mobilize resources, partnership to support the countries, both in terms of capacity and expertise. And a lot of it requires handholding. Next slide, please. And so this is our strategy to help to support the countries. And so the instruments that we have identified are grants, which serve a number of purposes, help us with studies, de-risking, ESIA, the 3G studies, help with specific capacity and experts to the countries, technical advisory service, and generally hand-holding with the country. Again, the context is that this is new for the region, and it's limited capacity, limited experience, and so on. And then also to support the regulatory framework, the instruments that need to make it happen. There are investment grants to actually do the drilling. And this investment grant is going to be important as to why it is a critical instrument apart from the TA grant. And then we have equity. The equity that we put in the process is usually a conversion of the grant to convert to government equity in the context of a public-private partnership. So that equity is important because government need to participate. It's complex, it's big, it's significant for the country, sometimes the most important massive infrastructure project. And so the role that government has played is critical. And one of the models that we pursue is to have some kind of joint venture PPP arrangement where government equity can be a part of it. And government can also earn a return or choose not to take a return. And then we have the contingently recoverable grant, which is a grant that goes to the project for the risk, for the drilling, and then it converts to a loan if there is success. And that's critical to de-risk in the mind of the private investor and also help the government in the first stage. And then concessional loans are important. It's very important to have low-cost loan because through low-cost loans, we're able to lower the tariff, the impact on the tariff. The higher the capital cost, it means it translates to a higher tariff. And the objective always is to make it more affordable. Two things are important. It's very important in terms of how we approach this because it is necessary for us to be able to pass through the concessionality. All the concessionality that we bring to the table need to be passed through to the end user and not necessarily increase the profit of the investor or the developer. And also procurement in terms of ensuring value for money becomes an important part of that. And in addition to that, not mentioned is also the ESI component. Next slide, please. So this slide really gives you a sense of those instruments. And I'll just take a minute on this because this is really where the innovation was critical in terms of addressing some of those
1 minute
issues.
left,
Pardon me?
1 minute left.
Yes, sure. So I'll just stop at this one. But we have mobilized over 150 million to support the countries. And it's about partnership. We have in there FCDO, Government of New Zealand, European Union, UUCIF, coming with different elements of those that I mentioned before through CDB. And the CRG go to government or grant to give make their equity. The loans go to the SPV, in which the government also participates in order to get the project going, in which case they recoup the investment through the revenue earned from the utility. Last slide, please. Just go to the last one, just to illustrate how it all works. And so you see at the top where the grants come in at the first stage, CRG and loans in the middle stage, and in the last stage is loan. If you look at that top line, you see where the countries are in the process on this that we have been supporting. And so we can always talk a little bit more to the time you have specific question as to how, what the experience has been and how these things have worked together. And very importantly, just one last point is that in the context of St. Kitts and Nevis, the CRG is forming a first loss capital in the sense that even though CDB's funding is only 17 million of the total required, it means that any failure, the CRG would take the hit so that the de-risk is de-risk the project in the sense that if a well fails, then that remains a grant. And after 2 wells, that it could begin to use their loan. But if the 4th well fails, then it also takes the hit. So in that way, it removes some of the risk from government, who is leading in this case, and also the private developer who is to come later on. I could talk some more based on specific questions. Thank you so much. I hope you're still able to follow me despite my speed. Thank you.
No, a lot to cover there, Joseph, but thank you. I think that really set the tone well for this discussion. And it gives an idea also of the complexity of the different actors that are necessary for projects like these to come to fruition. Actually, it's good, I think, in that case that we have those different actors represented in this conversation and brings us nicely onto the next speaker, Dr. Mohamed Nagdi, who's the Executive Director of the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, also known as CCRE, one of those actors working at the regional level to provide support for these kind of projects. So, Dr. Nagdi, over to you to provide some information on CCRE's role in this work.
Thanks, James. So fundamentally, CCRE is a multilateral organization that was officially started in 2018 with a key mandate towards supporting our CARICOM member states and Caribbean countries in moving away from fossil fuels, increasing energy efficiency, and also looking at climate mitigation. So particularly, we have the mandate for regional collaboration, which is extremely important. And fundamentally, that is where we exist in terms of supporting the member states towards looking at how we can focus on indigenous resources and how we can collaborate together to ensure that we maximize its benefits and minimize its risks. Just want to do you just want me to focus on the organization particularly? You want me to tell you a bit about the regional collaboration and the advancements that we're working on at this
No, I think
stage?
that would be great.
Okay.
The regional collaboration is important.
Okay, perfect. No problem at all. So, look, energy security is not just relevant for the Caribbean, no, but actually it's extremely essential and urgent, especially when we're talking about our energy future. And as small and development states, I don't need to tell anyone about our acute vulnerability, especially to climate change and also to to the volatile energy markets that we do have, and we are tied to, which unfortunately increases our vulnerability. So it's really time for us to move beyond incremental solutions and really try to embrace transformative change. And one of the most promising opportunities before us is promoting regional collaboration to advance our indigenous energy resources. And at the heart of this opportunity is geothermal energy. It's the most promising that we do have around, and it's fantastic to see that Caribbean countries have those resources available, and islands like St. Kitts and Nevis, Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and St. Lucia all have the reserves and are exploring those reserves, and the prospects really are extremely exciting. But with the acute vulnerabilities that we all know, and especially given our small economic scales, we really cannot afford to work in silos when it comes to geothermal energy or any renewable energy market for that matter. And if we're going to be serious about achieving energy security and affordability, then let's take the approach when developing geothermal resources that could be done collectively and not necessarily competitively. And I think that if we can imagine an energy grid where excess geothermal energy from one island could be transmitted to another, balancing supply and demand across borders, I think that with the additional link of also, if we think about it, disaster recovery post-hurricane, then this will not only strengthen our regional resilience, but it could also reduce the high energy cost and the dependency on the fossil fuels that are imported generally, and stabilize these electricity prices that are some of the highest in the world. So the regional grid is not just about cables and power lines, but we have to talk about policy harmonization. And right now, each country has their own set of energy regulations, technical standards, permitting processes, and these variances can slow progress and can deter investment if we're looking at a regional approach and collaboration. So I think alignment across the region with a single investor-friendly geothermal market could make projects easier to finance and develop. And equally important is knowledge sharing and capacity building, which is what I'm excited about. And I can say we work very closely with the Caribbean Development Bank and with FCDO present colleagues that are present here, and many other multilateral and developmental organizations to collaborate to develop regional expertise to build the skills necessary to support the industry in both the near term and to the long term. And we have to talk about the finance. And I know that Joseph is more the finance in expert than I am, but he would have mentioned it, the upfront cost of geothermal development is extremely daunting. But if we can pool our resources through regional funding mechanisms, public-private sector partnerships, and joint investment funds, we can de-risk these projects and attract financing needs to bring them to life. And we're seeing it happening in silos, but it would be exciting to see it being expanded further to accommodate more islands and more countries. So my message here today is clear, James. So a regional approach to sustainable energy integration of Caribbean indigenous resources is not just beneficial, but it's really essential. And I think that it's complemented. Let's complement our independent efforts with a coordinated regional approach towards maximizing the access to financing that we can have collaboratively, being able to exploit the resources that we have available to us.
Fantastic. No, I agree on those points. And I think I have a lot of questions. We'll come to questions at the end. And I'll also remind the audience, if you have questions that you would like to ask, there is a separate Q&A box to the chat. I can see 1 or 2 questions already coming in there. So if you have questions for CCRI or for any of the other organizations here, please do put them in and we'll have some time for discussions there. So thank you for that overview there. And I think for people who may, just one very quick follow-up question, for people who may not be familiar with CCRI's specific role with that, because I think sometimes for people looking at the different organizations that play a role in the energy transition at the regional level. Can you just define for people CCRI's specific role as compared to other organizations like CDB and these many others that are playing a role at the regional level in the energy transition?
So one of the critical areas that we do support is with the what we call the CEKH, so the Caribbean Energy Knowledge Hub. So at the basis of decision making, we have to ensure that we have robust data and information available to us. And one of our key mandates in the formation is to ensure that we're able to effectively be the central repository for energy data and information for the region. So we have a program that is set up where our team annually collects data and information from each country and houses it on several of on our CEKH website and our website, so that's accessible to partners to be able to utilize, as I said, in terms of making the best decision. We're also working closely with the CDB with the integrated resource and resilient plans as well to help countries chart a way, develop where they are, and to have an understanding as to where the energy mix is going to take them. And this also has the added inclusion of looking at climate variability and climate vulnerability assessments included, which is very exciting for us. We've been working with the Caribbean Development Bank for the past 3 to 4 years, and we're looking forward to the future prospects of being able to facilitate these IRPs for other countries. Fundamentally, I think it's at the crux of being able to look at the regional collaboration and providing the data, the information, and help to build the capacity for the energy integration, and provide that platform and that foundation for organizations like the CDB to be able to provide the funding, to be able to have the greatest impact is where we're the most useful, and also working with our developmental partners like the FCDO and many others to be able to implement impactful resources into the region, impactful initiatives that will actually move the needle in terms of our energy transition. And I think that's uniquely where CCRI is placed with the mandate towards focusing on energy. And the reality is that energy is the catalyst for development. And if we're going to talk about sustainable development, we have to talk about sustainable energy. And it's really exciting that when we talk about the energy conversation, it's included in almost every single facet and thematic area that we're talking about. We're talking about agriculture, we're talking about tourism, we're talking about water resources management, we're talking about disaster resilience and recovery, and it goes on and on and on. So it's really an exciting place to work. And but the only reason we're able to do this job effectively is through collaboration with all of our partners. And that's fundamentally where we like to be.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that oversight. Lots of questions coming in. So we'll move on to our next speaker now, but great to see CCRI's role in this. So thank you, Mo, for joining today. Next, we'll move on to our third speaker. So moving outside of the region to bring in a perspective from a country that is well known for its geothermal, its approach to geothermal, and has built up a lot of expertise in the geothermal sector. So Karine Châtenay is a civil engineer and a marketing manager from Verkis Consulting Engineers, an Icelandic company working in this sector, and will give us a perspective on Iceland's geothermal approach. So over to you, Karine.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much to Dr. Nagdi for the good words about the good ideas, what you can do in geothermal. Well, my name is Karin, and I'm from Verkis Consulting Engineers in Iceland, and I'm just going to give you in a very brief presentation what are the engineering solutions and what you can do with geothermal, actually. Let me move to the next slide, just a small thing here. So I want to mention that being from Iceland, we know what it means to have renewable energy sources and geothermal, to use geothermal for energy transition. And we started our energy transition a long time ago. And I can say that without geothermal, we want to be there where we are as a nation today. And we know the importance of using all aspects of geothermal as well. Because comes to the next slide here, geothermal utilization, it is a broad spectrum of potential that you have to consider when you have a project at hand. It's not only power. Usually it's feasible when you have resource at above 150 degrees. It can go as low as 80 degrees, but you have to have very special conditions to be able to exploit that in an economic way. You can use heat, and it's not because you're in the Caribbean that heat is not important for you. Heat can be used to produce food, to preserve food, but can also be used in other industrial sectors. And it can be used, wait a minute, I went too fast, also for tourism activities, nonetheless. I like the idea from Neves, but you could also use geothermal directly, actually, to produce clean water, not only by osmosis, but also by evaporating seawater and producing clean water. You have also power byproducts. That's very important, very interesting when you think about e-fuels. You could have a combination of producing electricity and producing e-fuels with some byproducts from your geothermal power plant. And some people are looking at that. It's more like in the pilot phase. I know there's been some projects, very interesting one on that side, at mineral and gas extraction, like lithium, manganese, but also CO2 to enhance production in greenhouses. I wanted to have this slide because I know that in your islands, you might have wind, you might have sun, you might have hydro, and you know how to exploit that. I just wanted to highlight here the fact that geothermal is baseload. Of course, it's geothermal resource bound. That's one of the aspects that maybe is a minus, but it has a small footprint. The environmental impact is considered minimum if you do it well. And the levelized cost of energy, LCOE, here in the table, is, well, generally from 40 US dollar per megawatt hour up to 120. Maybe in the islands, you could have maybe on the higher cost side, but it doesn't mean that it has to be. It really depends on your resource and the way you're going to develop your project. We know that contractor might be a little bit expensive to get to the island and so forth, but still you could have something very competitive with solar PV, especially if you have land use conflict or with other sources of energy. So definitely in your energy mix, something very important to consider. And I have taken here like a very dummy, not dummy, but just a scenario that was produced for Domlec in Dominica on how geothermal would be coming and replacing diesel as a base load. And basically that means a lot. I mean, if you have an island that has just maybe a few tens of megawatts of installed power, you come with one power plant that is 10 megawatts. That starts to make a huge difference in terms of energy mix. And it's very interesting. And I really look forward to seeing what is going to be done in Dominica or when the project is going to be taken online. That's very soon, hopefully. Just a few things though. This is just a typical development path. And if you want to do it well, you have to do your homework. These two phases here, resource reconnaissance, planning and preparation, are extremely important. And I really liked the presentation, the slide on risk. If you one way to mitigate or to eliminate the risk is to do your resource reconnaissance well. Just do your homework there. It's very important. And your first well, it's very important that it is successful, or at least that you get meaningful information on your resource. Nonetheless, it's very important also that you prepare well for financing. And it's extremely important that you demonstrate that you're going to do your project according to best practice, that you take into account your environmental, social, and impact and the like. Well, when you go into implementation, it's less complicated. It's more business as usual, and the risk is less, of course. Okay, just my last slide. Here are a few challenges that we've been working all around the world, not only in Iceland. And I must tell you that one of the challenges is that legal framework is often not ready, or maybe not, well, might be just the first project of its kind in on your territory. So things have to be, you have to find out how to do things, and that can be also a threshold. You, of course, have uncertainty on the resource. You don't know anything until you drill, or you know things, but you don't know for sure until you have your first well drilled, but you can do your homework there. I would say from the engineering point of view, the technology is mature and we have no problem with that. But you always have to adapt to resource. You're not going to buy a power plant before you know what kind of resource you have, the enthalpy, the composition of the fluid and the like. You would never do it that way. So you always have to be patient, get your first well, and then you adapt. And one of the things that we find can be tricky in some places, there's a lack of public knowledge on geothermal, and this is related to the ACA, and public acceptance can be a big issue in some cases, well, all around the world. So there it really depends on the project developer, how they do things. Okay, my last word then is do what you can with what you have wherever you are. And here is an example of a geothermal direct use project up in Chumatang in India, very high up in the mountains, where it just provides heat to a small school. So everything matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karin, for that overview, and look forward to asking some more questions in the discussion. I can see a few questions coming in now in the Q&A about the approach that has been taken in Iceland, and also some of the technical input from your side.
Thank you.
Our fourth and final speaker before we go into the Q&A and discussion is Ingrid Levine, who is the Renewable Energy Advisor from the FCDO, the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office of the UK government, which supports a number of geothermal energy projects around the Caribbean region. So Ingrid, I'll invite you to come onto the screen. And I think it'd be nice for you to complement what's already been said with some insights about your work and the approach, and then we can go into a discussion as well to further the questions that are coming in. Thank you very much for jumping in on this discussion.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone from sunny Barbados. I'm based in Bridgetown, Barbados. So it's been a very interesting discussion so far, and it's good to have a number of people on the call from different perspectives. So what I'll share is that the UK FCDO, we have been involved in, we've been programming in the region, supporting renewable energy penetration since 2025, when we started our increasing renewable energy and energy efficiency program. That program, we used a multi-strand approach, providing grant funding and technical assistance to help unlock some of the barriers to market and resource development in the region. So our approach was to provide some quick wins. So we had some immediate benefits from energy efficiency and small-scale solar PV installations. But we also laid the foundations, or our support helped to lay the foundations for longer-term transformation of the energy sector in the region through development of geothermal power. So our support to geothermal power focused on reducing the financial risks to governments from the drilling phases. And our speakers before, Karine, Joseph, and Mohammed would have spoken about the high risk, upfront risk for geothermal development. So a number of countries would have approached us back then about their interest in moving to a low carbon pathway of energy production and energy security. But there was limitations in what they could afford, and they were lacking in some ways in terms of the capacity to deliver, and just the knowledge to explore what was something new to the Caribbean, even though it's a technology that has been around for a long time. So we would have provided funding, excuse me, so where the governments in the region were unable to take on the risk themselves due to their high levels of debt and sometimes limited access to finance. And on the other end, if the private sector took on the risk, then the costs for the drilling would be included in the price of energy. And overall, or from a development perspective, we want the benefits to redound to the different countries. So the idea is to support the government in terms of international best practice. We supported the governments in the Eastern Caribbean to share the cost of drilling with the private sector. So our grant funding, we think, would have played a catalytic role. So governments and companies could then access better loans, terms, and other forms of assistance that other donors could offer, reducing the investment risk. So, excuse me, my apologies, I have a bit of a cough, but bear with me. I hope you can hear me clearly, and I'll be able to make my points across without a bit of
we
a
can hear
cough.
you. We can hear
Great.
you absolutely, Ingrid, no problem.
Great. So we supported the governments to have a greater stake, enabling them to negotiate better agreements with the private sector, and ultimately, hopefully, to reduce the eventual tariffs to consumers. But we believe that the cost of geothermal development is balanced by the potential benefits. As the speakers before would have said, it is a scalable renewable resource. It has the potential, like Karine said, not only for power, but for direct uses, alternative uses. There are a number of things that countries can do with geothermal power that makes it the upfront cost, if we can get it right, and if the resource is proven, that it can be transformational for the economy. So as I said, it's not only about energy security, but it is about full-scale transformation of economies in the Caribbean, moving away from heavily focused fossil fuel resource. So we thought back in 2015, geothermal was the technology that had the greatest potential to do this for the different Caribbean countries. So we would have provided and spent up to this date 19.3 million pounds to support this program. We would have partnered with World Bank and Joseph on the Line Caribbean Development Bank to deliver geothermal development projects in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dominica. Those projects are closed at the moment, and I'll give a little quick overview of the successes and our input there. And currently we're supporting St. Lucia through the World Bank, and we are now negotiating, and Joseph, I'll be calling you later. We're negotiating an agreement with CDB to support Grenada. Our funding was focused primarily on exploratory drilling, and in the case of Dominica, drilling of the production and reinjection wells and the associated civil works. Because as everyone has said before, those upstream costs are where the most risks are. So using grant funding to support the countries to de-risk at that stage is best practice, and that is where our support has gone. So in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we would have supported 4.2 million in that project. The result was not that they were not able to prove a commercial resource in St. Vincent at that time, but to say it's not considered a loss because the infrastructure that is in place now provides government with equity to explore alternative uses. So I know that they are exploring other opportunities that they can use the resources that they have, and they're able to negotiate with different players using the equity of the wells that are in existence, the infrastructure that is in existence, to move hopefully to a new stage of exploration, a new stage of geothermal use. Excuse me. And as I said, we have publicly committed 10 million pounds to support the Grenada geothermal project, and we are expecting to sign an MOU with CDB very soon to deliver that work in Grenada. On the Dominica front, we would have provided UK's support of 8.5 million to the drilling, allow them to essentially de-risk the upstream cost of providing private sectors with confirmation of the resource. And they are now in the position, very excited about this, where they're developing a 10 megawatt geothermal plant. And we wish them every success. And we're hoping to see very soon, hopefully by the end of this year, the first geothermal plant in the English-speaking Caribbean happening in Dominica. And in St. Lucia, if their resource is proven, they will be in a very strong position to negotiate a beneficial power purchase agreement and financing for the construction of a plant, and similarly for Grenada. So I just wanted to give that overview of where we've been working. We will continue to work in the region, but some of the key lessons that we would have learned are that government commitment, high-level champion is key to geothermal development. It is a long game, it's a high-risk, long game. So there are financial and sometimes political risks to stay in the course. But as the case was with Dominica, staying the course and having the right partners, the mix of partners, grant funding, private sector, all of the technical and capacity building support. And they are now in a position where they could be the first to have the plant. And it is a patient development is critical. Partners need to stay the course. So while the government is staying the course, there are challenges that arise, and working in the small island developing states, there are capacity challenges, there are hurricanes, there's COVID, all sorts of things can happen, but we need to be in a position to be flexible and work with our partners and stay the course to allow them to reach the goals that they are seeking to achieve. So I'm going to stop there and happy to answer any questions. So thank you again, and look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. And I think it's good to have that reality check of all of the hurdles that do come in the way on this journey. I can see lots of questions coming in through the Q&A, so we will get to those in just a second. I just want to, you may have seen in the chat, I just want to share a very brief presentation. As I am sure you've heard by now, several times from us, this is your opportunity to join us for the Global Sustainable Island Summit in May in St. Kitts and Nevis. And I just want to share a little bit more information about why you should be joining us in May, and specifically for the Island Geothermal Forum, which will be happening alongside that. The GSIS, as it's called itself, is taking place on the 27th to the 29th in St. Kitts at the Marriott Resort. And we will have key attendees from the government, investors, various stakeholders, including the types of stakeholders that have been discussed today, high level from across the region and from around the world. And this conference, the Global Sustainable Island Summit, takes place every year in a different island region. So last year it took place in Prince Edward Island, a Canadian province. The year before in Madeira, Portuguese island region. And next year we'll be announcing shortly, but we'll likely be coming back to Europe again. So every year we move this global forum hosted by Island Innovation to a different island region. And it covers a wide variety of topics on sustainable development, addressing all the issues that we talk about that specifically address the need for islands. And of course, energy transition is a huge part of that. But I wanted to show here, so the many events that will be happening. The forum itself is the Global Sustainable Island Summit itself on the 27th, the 28th, and 29th of May. But the day before the summit, we have the Geothermal Energy Forum taking place in Nevis, which will be a much smaller, focused event on the 26th of May, with a chance to learn from the Nevis experience and gather together those stakeholders that are working internationally on geothermal and how it can be a key tool. So we'd really encourage you to reach out to our team if you're interested to learn more about attending the Geothermal Energy Forum, because I think this is a really exciting opportunity to learn from various stakeholders, not just Nevis, but from the other islands that will be in touch. So here's the contact details from my colleague Michaela, who is organizing that. If you're interested in sponsorship or getting tickets for that, please reach out to Michaela, and there's some more details in the chat. With that, I'll invite all of our speakers to come onto the screen, please, and we will jump into the discussion. And I can see lots of questions coming in, but I wanted just to kick off with one of these questions around barriers. So we've heard about all of the potential around geothermal energy that it can really offer for islands. And that many islands, not all islands, but there are many islands. We've heard about Nevis, about Dominica. Some people in the chat were mentioning some other islands in Canary Islands and Greece and Italy. But if geothermal energy offers so much potential, why are we still struggling in so many cases to see the rollout? What are the biggest barriers? And various speakers have touched on different factors. But what are the barriers that we're looking at that are specific for islands? And one thing that I'm really interested to know about is the scale problem. There is specifically an understanding that in many cases there's a scalar challenge for geothermal plants that a smaller population that I know has been the case in the Eastern Caribbean. So is there anyone that would like to jump in on that specific challenge? And Joseph, I'll invite you to come back on screen when you get the chance. But what are the biggest barriers that we see overall that are really kind of inhibiting the rollout overall? And what also can we see that will really is going to change that hopefully? And what it could also be in terms of the finance as well.
I can jump in. I think one of the major concerns is really the barriers, the high upfront cost, to be honest with you, James. Yes, Karine mentioned it, but effectively there's really some significant cost towards exploration and drilling. And imagine investing in that drilling without coming back with a tangible resource being identified. And I think that is an area that is a major barrier towards the exploration of geothermal. We always have to remember that, small and developing states are fiscally constrained economies, and they have to ensure that the financing and funding available is utilized in the best way possible. But there is, again, extremely high capital expenditure involved in exploring geothermal, and I think that fundamentally that is a barrier. I'll also go back to the point where I mentioned that you had mentioned in terms of why the uptake has been quite slow. I'll probably have to say, I mentioned the lack of policy and regulatory frameworks that are present. It's almost doing and learning and doing at the same time. So while the exploration is happening, while we're looking to go through regulatory requirements, the planning processes for the drilling, and to be able to explore, we're also the countries are also developing policies hand in hand. And in itself, because it's a new area that's being explored, in many instances, the technical capacity in country is not there. So it really is a slow process moving forward. And I alluded to it a bit before, but the possibility of looking a bit further afar in terms of the region to see what capacity is there could also help to, it's one of those unfortunate cases where the first island or the second island may have to bite the bullet and go through the teething stages of figuring it out. But hopefully once they're able to facilitate that, then South-to-South cooperation is really an ideal area that could that is also beneficial to the region. But again, the regular frameworks that are not available is also what I would consider to be a barrier. Limited grid capacity. We'll go back to the point where the capacity of the aging grids is a major concern as well, especially when we're looking at new sources and renewable sources. And I also think that is a barrier towards the implementation or the utilization of any renewable sources. And we have stories across the region where we've seen fantastic penetration of renewable energy, but halted simply because the grid is unable to take the uptake of renewable sources. Not necessarily the case in geothermal because it is fixed load, but still considerations in terms of being able to upgrade the national grids that we do have. So I'll stop there on those 3 points.
Oh yeah, on that topic, there's a follow-up question that was asked by Roderick Gordon, which I think is relevant, is about the progress on discussions on establishing cross-border energy transfer in the region, which I know has been discussed many times in the Eastern Caribbean. Is that something that you see advancing at all? Because I understand that is something that could be a positive aid in establishing geothermal.
Absolutely. And I know that Joseph can definitely speak much more to this because CDB really has been leading in this discussion. But what I will say is that absolutely it is more than a possibility. It's a question of political will as well. And I think that the political will has gained tremendous momentum. But again, I think the barrier is around the cost to connect the countries together and also ensuring that there are minimal regulatory policies in place, and also ensuring that it's also beneficial across borders, which is obviously a concern that small and developing states have. But yes, there is gaining momentum. We can see that it's going to happen, or I will say that it would happen within the OECS countries first, and then looking to expand further across the further Caribbean. but definitely an area that I know Joseph is actively working on. So I won't put him on the spot, but I know he can handle himself if he wants to say a bit more.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Karin first for any follow-up on that, and then afterwards I'll come to you, Joseph. Karin? Oh. We can come back to you if not.
Sorry,
Okay.
sorry, no, that's a
Go
moment.
ahead.
Someone just called me at the time I was just about
No
to
problem.
speak.
Oh.
Well, I wanted to add to what Dr. Nagdi mentioned. Well, let's assume that you have your resource confirmed and you've de-risked that aspect, which is very important. And I know that there's a lot of work that's been going on in all the islands in the Caribbean in trying to move towards that, which is really good. Now you get.
Not sure what happened there. Hopefully Karin will be back with us soon. So Joseph, over to you in the meantime.
Thanks for the contribution so far. So this question is an interesting one because all the factors mentioned are important and they come together to, cause a challenge. But let me tell you, for each country, we can go through one by one and explain to you, if it were possible, to specifically tell you what were the specific issues. And as a general point, and this is not just for geothermal, many times the issues around access to money. Listen, if the projects are not procured properly, if you don't have a competitive frame, you cannot access development financing, period. And that has been the case across many countries for many years, for many different elements of renewable energy. So you are limited to getting some high-cost money. And let me tell you how it works. It works this way. The developer will come and will sign an agreement with government, sign a PPA, and then he goes searching for money. Okay? So first of all, you cannot get the best value for money. The country does not get the best price that they could get for that project, even if the developer is able to access financing. So I want to highlight that as a major one that has stymied the development across countries for many years. I think things are changing. And even though the procurement process within the development banking space, for example, can be a challenge because sometimes a little slower, but what you end up with is a transparent, a process that has very greater buy-in and value for money proposition being upheld, right? So I just want to put that out there, in addition to treating with risks like the environmental and social. Where we are today is far different from where we were 10 years ago. So any projects that's going to be developed going forward is going to be much, much faster. Let me just say that. I remember speaking with one executive and a point was made, has it taken us 10 years to be able to do it? Listen, the points around the countries, the capacity is not a small point. And all of those things, we have gone through those. So I think where we are now, it is different. And the point of interconnection is no more a thought, but we have to go about this thing in a very pragmatic way, which means we have to understand what is possible, what is feasible, and then move from there in terms of a strategy. So where we are now, CDB is leading the process, as Mo mentioned, to do a roadmap and strategy initially, and some initial studies, not just a roadmap, but really based on evidence. And we are at the stage where we have almost completed the procurement process for international consultants who have been there, done that around the world, to help to move that process forward. So before the end of the second quarter, I should say by the end of the first quarter, we hopefully will have a contract signed with a firm who's going to start that work significantly. So it's no longer talk, but it's now happening in that regard. But we have to do the work. We have to understand what's possible. We have to understand what makes sense initially, and that requires the study. The final point I want to make on that is that geothermal as a resource option, the value of geothermal has significantly changed. Significantly, if you notice, I'm emphasizing, right? And so whereas before the countries were targeting their domestic demand to treat with that, what you have now is the opportunity to do interregional trade. They can look now not just at the domestic supply, but looking at doing excess supply production, right? So that they can look at trade and so on. Because not only for green hydrogen that is going to be in demand, that is in demand for more than 50 countries globally that has already elaborated green hydrogen strategy, not only for that, but also because the countries themselves will become prime destination for things like crypto mining or AI computing, which are very energy intensive. So if we can get the projects developed, get the price right, the opportunities are going to be massive. And I mean, the energy sector can be that engine for transformation, but we have to do it right. And that's, I think we have learned a lot now in that regard, and our position now to move to the next phase. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joseph. We are at time, so unfortunately, Corinne's had to leave. And if any of our other speakers do have to leave, I would completely appreciate that. But as we have so many questions in, if you're able to stay for just another 5 or 10 minutes or so, it would be great, and we'll try. So Corinne's had to leave, but she said that Joseph had already said everything that she wanted to say. That's great, and I think you made some great points there. But we do have a lot of very interesting questions coming in, and particularly Ralph Burkhoff. Thank you, Ralph, for all of these great questions. One for you specifically, Dr. Nagdi, but of course, if any other speakers would like to jump in, you're welcome. Is also an interesting one around the relationship with utilities. And I think, as Joseph said, this question of every island, every country having a very specific context. And so in some countries, the utility is privately owned. In some countries, the utility is government owned. So I think Ralph is asking from a developer's perspective, how to convince the utilities that the use of geothermal will also secure financial benefits. Not sure if you can give any thoughts on that one.
Yeah. So in the Caribbean, Caribbean governments are, in most cases, major shareholders in local utilities and have a vested interest. I think the conversation has to be to convince them is really around energy security and financial returns. And the challenge is really to demonstrate that transition into geothermal is just not an environmental win, but really you have to convince them that's a strategic economic decision that is being made. And you know what, fundamentally it is, because geothermal offers long-term financial stability for governments and utilities. A major amount of a country's GDP is really committed towards the importation of fossil fuels. I mean, sometimes the percentage of GDP committed is I don't want to say ludicrous, but it's substantial, and we can understand the way we are small islands and we have to import the majority, if not all, of our resources. But by transitioning to geothermal, governments can eliminate some of these costs. Freeing up capital for other developmental priorities, especially in the case of social space. So I think that discussion and being able to free up some of the GDP and the availability of funding is really an important point to bring across. I think that also being able to provide stable and predictable energy prices is very important. So as we know, oil and gas is not fixed. It is volatile to global markets. But if indigenous geothermal resources, they do have fixed operating costs that are not necessarily subject to such volatility. And it's also in many cases extremely resilient to storms and hurricanes, given how these plants are generally set up. So I think just having a convincing argument linked towards the economic responsibility and also the economic gains for a country, and especially linked towards the revenue generation through possible power exportation, is also another area that we can potentially convince governments towards exploring geothermal energy. What I will also say is that the governments are well aware of this. I don't think that there's any disconnect in us having to convince the government. I think that the governments of the Caribbean who have these potential resources at their disposal are moving forward fast and quickly in order to be able to explore them responsibly and being able to benefit for them regionally, nationally and regionally.
Absolutely. And I also just wanted to share, there's a comment here from Julius Gittens on some of the work done by the OECS, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. And I do want to highlight that the OECS has been a very active player in the work around geothermal. They're not represented on the panel today, but I don't want to exclude the important work that the OECS has done. So I would encourage everyone in the audience to read that. I'll also share it in the chat as well to make sure you can read that work. And obviously many of the islands that are being discussed, Nevis, Dominica, are countries in the OECS network, so OECS group of countries. So I just wanted to also mention that. Joseph, I know you've got your hand up, but as we're just running time, I do want to flag one issue that has come through in questions that were submitted before the forum and also here in the Q&A. And obviously here we have a panel of people that are very supportive of geothermal. We're all talking about all the benefits. But like any technology, there are pros and cons, and there are maybe some potential drawbacks of geothermal or damage that we need to acknowledge. And I'd like the panelists to comment on any potential risks of geothermal, environmental risks, and what can be done to mitigate or manage those. Because I know, for example, in Hawaii, there's been a lot of discussion around the potential environmental impacts of geothermal, impacts on indigenous sites. And it's important to acknowledge that these are also being taken into account in the discussion. Does anyone have any comments on this? One comment that was made here was, which I'm less aware of, was potential discharge of fluids, for example, that come from geothermal sites. Or other emissions. Is this something that has been discussed, or I guess as we are still in the early stages, it's
Hi.
Right.
This is a technical area. I would have left it for Joseph and more to speak of, but from my experience, the one thing that I know of that has come up is potential for, well, there's a biodiversity aspect of it, but that is the same with any physical development project, which is, and you would have seen in the progress chain that Karine had mentioned, that ESIA is a very critical part. Environmental and social impact assessment is a very critical part of any work that you're going to do. So all of the projects that we are doing, that has to be approved first. So you have to determine where the site is, what the risks are, and develop an environmental management plan to support, to make sure that the risks are mitigated. But I know there was one issue in terms of water resources, because in the drilling stage, there's a lot of water use. So that has to be managed very closely. And then any risk to where the site is, because a lot of these sites are in remote locations. So there is the flora and fauna that has to be protected. And those are the types of things that I have come across. Obviously, during construction, there's noise, issues with noise. But for most of these sites, these are in such remote locations that those, at least on the projects that I'm aware of, have not come up as critical issues. So I would think that the main one that I would have heard of is in terms of water use and disposal, where they dispose of any drill spoils and that sort of thing. But those things are captured in the environmental management plans that are closely monitored by our development partners and the beneficiary governments. So I don't know if there's anything else that Joseph or Mo wanted to add.
So in that sense, it's quite a project by project basis, and that environmental impact assessment, as with any other projects, is a critical part of the development.
Yes, I would say so. And the thing in terms of, it's very critical to get the public information out early, I think, because people have their own perceptions. And if you don't manage that with sound science and information, you can have a lot of challenges, and you might have you could have opposition not necessarily based on anything concrete. So it's important to get out there early with the information and sharing with the public what is going on and the issues that could arise. But that's something that's very, very critical for that early phase of project development.
Public engagement is absolutely critical, as with all energy or sustainable development projects. Absolutely fascinating discussion. A lot of food for thought here. I really appreciate all of your time and input. We'll give any of you a quick 30 seconds for any final thoughts, if you would like to, before we wrap up. I know we're already over time. So Joseph or Mohammed or Ingrid, if you have any final thoughts before we wrap up, now is your chance.
I'll
sorry.
Mohammed first and then Ingrid.
No, I just wanted to compliment what Ingrid said and to say that geothermal is really one of the more cleaner power sources out there. That being said, assessing environmental safeguards and social safeguards is extremely important in any of the work that all of us do. So being able to explore and develop responsibility is at the foundation of everything that we do. We do not necessarily want to have a negative impact across. So with that being said, even in terms of the utilization of type of machinery that is done for the exploration, responsible either recycling or reusing is always at the heart of everything that we do. And I just wanted to compliment and end by adding and complimenting what Ingrid would have said. So I'll end there and give Ingrid and Joseph the opportunity to weigh.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that we're very excited about the potential for transformation that geothermal poses for the Eastern Caribbean particularly, and also the opportunities for sharing energy resources across the region. I would only say that the FCDO is very committed to supporting renewable energy uplift. Our FS actually launched the Global Clean Power Alliance, and that we're going to be working through missions to address some of the critical and urgent energy transition challenges. So stay tuned for this work. And that we will continue to work hand in hand with our development partners and our beneficiary countries to move the dial on renewable energy penetration. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ingrid. Joseph, any final thoughts?
Sorry, I was divided. I was on 2 calls. So sorry about that. But I just want to make one point around the utilities that I think, we talk generally, but I'm in a little bit of an unfair advantage in that I know specifically the situation with each of the countries. And I can say to you categorically that all the utilities are on board. So the issue that the utilities are, is beyond us. We could talk about that 6 years ago. The issue, though, is that the nature of the PPAs that are put before the utilities are sometimes not at the level that the utilities can move forward with them. Those are specific issues and relate to some countries. So my point here is that is less about the utilities' willingness and commitment, but more about ensuring that we have robust projects and projects that make sense, meeting the value for money and so on. So I just leave it at that. I think most of the speakers covered the important points, but I just want to say that I think thank you for the conversation. I think it's very important. It's very important for us to share. Somebody talk about Guadeloupe. There's a lot of different contexts here. We have a lot to talk about in terms of what we have learned. But the important thing is that I think we are now at a stage where things will move. Things have been moving, and as we go forward, we should see significant acceleration of progress. Thanks.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for the time. Really appreciate this very interesting discussion. Of course, we look forward to continuing it in May in Nevis. A lot of potential for geothermal to contribute to the renewable energy transition. For those of you in the audience, this is part of a series of 3 webinars, the first, and so look out in the communications for the next 2, specifically the next one in 2 weeks focused on youth engagement, and following that one on subnational island jurisdictions and territories on access to climate finance. So look out for some more information on those. And with that, we'll end the webinar. Thanks again to everyone and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.